So, if you're in a room with some seasoned male ministers, what would you like them to know so they can champion you better in ministry leadership? Well, let us know your thoughts in the comment, but don't go just anywhere because I want to come back and introduce you some amazing male champions in our fellowship. See you soon. Hey everybody, I'm Saehee, and this is the Network of Women Ministers Leadership Podcast. As you know, great leaders are lifelong learners. Hey, I'm so excited to learn together with you by hearing from two of my heroes of faith, Pastor Rod and Pastor Jim. Well, let's welcome them to join our exciting conversations. Pastor Rod and Pastor Jim, where are you? Pastor Rod, Pastor Jim, so excited you guys are joining this important, exciting conversation. How are you guys doing?
We're well. It's great to see you, Saehee, and love always to be with my friend, Pastor Rod.
I'm always excited to be with Jim, and I'm counting on him to have lots of smart answers, and I'm just going to agree.
You're just going to agree with him. That's good. As long as you're not disagreeing, this is going to be a great conversation, right?
You know, before we started, he said he was going to disagree with me. So anyway, we'll see what happens. I think I'll just disagree with him.
Yeah, you know what? A lot of people may know you, but there could be some people who are not familiar with you and your story. So to give a context of who you are, can you please just kind of briefly tell us about your current ministry roles and also the types of ministries that you've experienced and you've learned over the years? Pastor Jim, why don't you start us off?
I'm the lead pastor of Central Assembly of God in Springfield, Missouri. And this is my second round being the pastor there. I first came back about 17 years ago, pastored for 5.5 years, and then I went next door to the Assemblies of God National Office, served for nearly 10 years as general secretary. And the pastor who followed me at Central when I went to be general secretary later resigned, and they asked me if I come back and be an interim pastor while I was general secretary, and one thing led to another, and I'm now just full-time pastoring at Central Assembly. I backed into ministry in a non-traditional route. I was an engineering student at University of Minnesota, pastoring a small Bible study, had a spiritual breakthrough, and eventually became a university church. And so I went right from graduating to pastoring that group full-time, then pastored on the West Coast as well for about 15 years. And had an opportunity in every one of those ministry contexts to work with female staff and amazing women of God within those great church families God gave me the privilege of pastoring.
Wow, thank you so much for the years of service and ministry. So exciting. How about you, Pastor Rod? Tell us about some things that, yeah.
Well, Jim Bradford is my hero, so that's my greatest thing. He's the smartest guy I know, and just he has a remarkable gift of when he is talking to you, you feel like you're the only person in the room. So
yes.
I love to be around Jim. He's a life-giving friend. I am lead pastor at First Assembly in North Little Rock, where I've been pastor. It'll be 20 years next year, but been here 28 years, and I've been everything in those 28 years. I've been children's pastor twice, youth pastor 3 times, worship pastor once. So I am a jack of all trades, master of none.
And you still, as a lead pastor, still ministers to some young people. I think that's very inspiring.
I'm in student ministry on Wednesday nights, not as a pastor, but as a team member in student ministry. That's kind of my ministry. I think everybody should have a ministry they don't get paid for. So that's mine. And I love being around students.
Yeah, I'm sure they love being around you.
I'm enjoying the fruit of his labors because some of his high school students that graduated the last couple of years are now attending the church I pastor while their students at Vander University
Wow.
are some of the best we have.
That's amazing. That's the beauty of the body of Christ. We serve everywhere you go, right? That's so cool. So here's like a follow-up question. Tell us one thing about you that most people don't know about. Maybe not even your spouses. Go ahead. Pastor Rod, anything that makes you unique?
You know, I'm extraordinarily average. So that's, I don't have any natural gifts or talents. So everything for me is hard work and effort. I'm an introvert. And so for me, it's just, I'm willing to try harder. So I work a lot. And by the time I'm done, if I'm in a huge crowd, that exhausts me. So I am refreshed and recharged by time alone.
Okay, how about Pastor Jim?
Don't believe him. He's one of the most gifted guys I know. But he does work really, really hard as well. Something some people don't know. I grew up in Canada. My great-great-great-grandmother, Susanna McCrae, was saved under John Wesley's ministry in Wales when she was 12 years old. And then in the mid-1800s, her family immigrated to Midwestern Canada, in the area that my mom, a generation or two later, was born. And she led a Methodist revival in Midwestern Canada that was totally remarkable. She prayed for people, they'd be healed, et cetera, et cetera. She was also known for her prayer life and for her life as an evangelist. But she was just a 12-year-old girl saved under Wesley's ministry, and God really used her when they homesteaded in the Western Canadian prairies. And I think I may be the only person in her family line in full-time ministry today. But I do feel indebted to actually a woman of God who led a whole spiritual awakening in Midwestern Canada.
Wow, that's fascinating. What a legacy. So I want to ask you this next questions to you, Pastor Jim, since you have that rich heritage of having female ministers in your own life. So based on your experiences over the years, what are some things that you've observed regarding the women's role in church leadership? And you can mention both positives and negatives. We can learn from all of those. So what's your thought on that?
I've never had a female lead pastor. And because of how I backed into ministry, I was not like a youth pastor or associate pastor to somebody else. So I've only sat in the lead pastor seats. However, on my team, females who have filled just about every role, whether it be pastoral care, children's ministry, youth pastors, of course, women's ministries pastors. Sometimes I've had at least part-time and sometimes full-time women on the team with women's ministries, as well as overall associate pastor ministries. And so I've found that that these ladies have been incredibly versatile, really highly gifted. The list of positives is really, really long. I found I generally trust, I hope guys don't mind this, but I trusted them to follow through in the details and organize things well, more than I did the guys that were on my team. They just knew how to often think sequentially about how to make things happen. Excellent. Some of my best, even today, some of my best volunteer recruiters are females on my team. I mean, they just they really have this fire in them, and this sort of left brain and right brain connection that we guys aren't. Apparently, we don't have in quite the same way. And I really found that left brain, right brain work really well together. They're creative. They could design things. They could follow through. They were always really, really trustworthy. On the negative side, sometimes it's just totally me. I often felt bad that I couldn't give them even more leadership within the budget confines of the staff role they filled, but I generally tried to give them as much room to run as they could. Sometimes the Sunday morning preaching, like I have a preaching team with Crystal Martin, Pastor Crystal, works part-time on our team, so she's on my preaching team. But I do, especially during COVID when we only do one preaching service a week, it's just harder to give them experience. So that was one of the things I always felt like, I just wish I could figure out ways of just giving them even more platform time. But what they did bring to the table was amazing. Also found that they often felt, if I wanted to really know what was going on in the church, I'd probably talk to one of them, even more than one of the guys. Or they also carried that emotionally in a way that some of my male associate pastors didn't. And it made them great intercessors. They were great people of prayer. Sometimes I saw, though, that sort of that maternal dimension of them couldn't detach themselves emotionally from the kids like maybe us dads could. So.
Yeah, and that's a really great observation, and that's something that we can work on. And we really need, as female ministers, need honest feedback. Both, I mean, positives are great, but really negatives or the weaknesses that we need to hear so we can strengthen those skill sets, So thank you so much, Pastor Jim, for touching on that sensitive topic. Pastor Rod, I have a question for you. So what are some leadership characteristics you think that are important for female ministers to develop to fully participate in God's kingdom work? This can be a tricky question, but I just want your honest feedback.
Yeah, that's probably a bit of a tricky question, because I have a tendency to think the leadership characteristics that females need to develop to fully participate in God's kingdom work is much the same as what guys need to develop to participate in God's kingdom work. I grew up around sisters, so I'm very comfortable with strong women. And my number 2 is a woman. My CFO is a woman. My board vice chair is a woman. I think maybe sometimes it's just having the confidence to speak freely and candidly, even though it's a male leader. And so I like people to tell me the truth, and I don't necessarily need it wrapped. I want to know what's your take on it? What did you think was good? What was bad? And sometimes, as I work with female ministers, there's a little tendency to be nervous about full candor, wondering how I'm going to receive it because it's from a woman. And so there's a little hesitancy to speak, which I would like to see more of. But leadership characteristics, it's, can you lead yourself well? It's how much of a price are you willing to pay? What's for every leadership task, there's what price are we willing to pay? How much are we willing to put into it? I think females tend to have a little more innate sensitivity to the needs of others than guys do. And so that is a great strength. And sometimes just need a little more confidence to call what they see.
I really like that, the word that you use, confidence, because that's, as a woman, female minister, I do want to speak confidently, and I believe that our viewers could probably relate to me, but there's a fine line that we're walking as female leaders. Like, I want to find that right balance of being confident without coming across like bossy, that's one character that we encourage our male colleagues or raising boys, like, talk confidently, walk confidently. And when female tend to speak like that, it's not received well. So what kind of balance can we find so that we are not aggressive, but coming across confident and honorably? Any thoughts on that?
I think there's some of it is the leader giving the permission for that. And then it's how the leader responds the first time. The first time somebody speaks to you with full candor, your response sets the tone of your relationship forever. And so that first time you get full candor from someone, you have to be willing to listen and to receive that. If you don't, you'll never get it again. Now, I don't mind someone seeming bossy. I'm I'm really comfortable with bossy people in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. So I maybe, if anything, they might be too honest with me at this stage of the journey.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Pastor Jim?
Well, I think for female, there's because I'll go to the front of the line there saying you just need to be confident. You don't need to try too hard to prove anything. Just be who you are. Say what you think. Say it respectfully, and that ought to technically be enough. But I would say 3/4 of your problem is with we lead pastors, male, who maybe can't handle candor from either male or female staff people. Our insecurities haven't been tamed. We're making too many of our decisions and too many of our reactions to people around us, especially when we hear something we don't want to hear. We can click back on old stereotypes, old patterns, the way my dad treated my wife, my mom, or all of these old patterns. Not to mention, the males have a pretty fragile ego, I hate to say, and we're all trying to live with crucified egos and not personalize everything that's said towards us. But we lead pastors have probably more buttons that get pushed by maybe female co-workers than even more. It's not than with guys. It's not like just going out and going out to lunch with the guys and just kind of joking around with each other. I mean, everything's much more guarded, and we're also always much more sensitive. So I think at your best, you're not going to win some of this, and it's not your fault as a female pastor at all. You're just dealing with an uphill climb with a lot of us as male pastors, unfortunately. Yeah. And that's in our leadership style. That's in our insecurity structures. That's everything. And so I encourage you to just keep being patient. I think just being steady and persistent. When I'm at the table, first of all, I get nervous. I learned this from a friend of mine. He's a general superintendent of Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, our sister movement up there. And he said, I'm always nervous when there's not a woman at the table. And he kind of inculcated that in me. And I miss it. I actually feel uncomfortable when there's only guys around the table at this point in my life. And so I just encourage lead pastors that are listening, you got to develop an ear for that female perspective until you really see your need of that. Because we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back if we don't have both perspectives. And we pastors just need to keep training ourselves, and we need grace from you ladies, to not back off. Don't medicate our own paranoias here. Don't go tiptoeing around. Be respectful, but just be steady. Just say things well. You don't ever want to be in a place where you only criticize and you never say anything encouraging either. But just, when something needs to be said, enter into group discussion around the table. You may be the minority voice. There may be only 2 women and 8 guys around the table, but say your piece anyway. And, with time, the wisdom you have, the clarity you have, the willingness not to be framed by male prejudice, just being matter of fact. Sometimes that's the word that goes through my head when I see ladies at the table and they're trying too hard to push or something. Yeah. Just be matter of fact, confident in a very matter of fact way.
Wow. I just want to, first of all, thank you both for your transparency and authenticity. And even the courage to say that, the crucified ego, that's a really strong word, but then you just kind of humbly said that from male to other male peers. And so thank you for really doing that. Also, the grace you're talking about, it's a mutual thing. As you extend grace to other female ministers, we also need to extend the same grace because we're learning to work for God's kingdom together. This is an exciting season, difficult season, but a necessary step. I think that kind of leads to my next question, really. Since you are on the path of being vulnerable and open, I would like to probe that a little bit more. Is there any practical heads up or inside scoops that female ministers should know about as we lead side by side with our male colleagues? Because we're outsiders, we're learning this new culture of ministry that's predominantly men. So what do we need to know so we can do this better together?
I'll give you one, the Billy Graham rule. It's understand that even though I'm not an adherent to that rule, I'm leading in a church where that rule was almost equated to gospel in the deep past, and that I'm aware that other ministers judge me by whether I adhere to that rule. So I feel the exact same tension you feel. And I mean, the Billy Graham rule, in short, is I should never be alone with you. Well, I can't mentor you and I can't be in a real relationship with you if we're never allowed to be alone. So if you won't freak out about that rule, I won't freak out about that rule. But rather than either one of us ranting about it, we just need to acknowledge that is, in many ministry circles, that's an expectation. If we'll acknowledge that right up front, then it doesn't feel so weird when we're together. So I have enjoyed, I've got this weekend, while we're talking, I've got 4 of the top female lead pastors in America here with us in Little Rock for the weekend. Well, I'm enjoying rich, rewarding time with them. I'm the only guy in the room, but it doesn't feel weird to me. So don't feel weird for me.
Right. Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for that encouragement and exhortation. Yes, we got to be okay with being around one another because it's all about God's kingdom. How about you, Pastor Jim? What's some inside scoops do you have to offer for us?
Let me pick up on the Billy Graham rule. I would agree with Pastor Rod. I do draw a line around away from the church, purely social setting, alone with the female. And there's, out of respect for my wife, if occasionally that happens, I usually let her know ahead of time. Partly the problem is out in public, like a restaurant or something, where you're one-on-one with another adult lady, not your wife. It would only take one rumor in a city like I'm in to completely torpedo my ministry and hers. So, you can't control what other people would see is perceived, and even though I may trust myself, fine, but so kind of when it's highly social, non-work, and somewhat public, or highly social even if it's not public, I try to draw a line there. But I do meet one-on-one with women, and I don't. I just keep this kind of that social criteria is my guideline. When you're, I feel bad sometimes for the females on our staff team. I mean, the guys will say, hey, let's go out to lunch, and sometimes they're the ones that'll get left out. You're going to have to brace for that. It's just the real world. You can't let idealism sink you. You got to get over your idealism. You can't let anybody else define you, your worth or your value, or even what you do can't define you. So you just don't be overly affected by the fact, like, hey, the guys went out and they didn't even ask me to go with them. I never get asked to go out with the guys. That probably is true. You don't, and there's other battles more worth fighting than that, probably. But maybe you'd want to initiate yourself. I deeply believe that you expect more of yourself than you do of other people. So that protects me from sitting around and becoming the victim of what somebody else does or doesn't do. So, if you find that as the lady on a staff with 4 other guys or something, which is often a frequent ratio, 1 to 4 or 5, don't let it bother you if they're not initiating with you, but you go ahead and initiate with them. Don't sit around waiting for somebody to do or don't do something. You're a leader. You're an initiator. You take up your own responsibility. You do that. You make your own decisions about what life's going to be like, and you start taking the initiative. And you invite a couple of guys to go out to lunch with you. If they're not including you in the circle. And guys have this kind of locker room kind of mentality. You just hang out and call each other Bubba, and there's just this kind of male culture that we all grew up in, where most of our social relationships were at. Our relationships with women were often more romantic or dating kind of things. So often we don't have a good instinct of how just to be pals together with women in the group as well. And I think you can help teach us that just by taking the initiative yourself. And you're just going to have to decide up front, I'm going to be doing a lot of initiating. If you start resenting that, it's going to torpedo you. But if you just decide, I'm always going to expect more of myself than I do of others. I'm always going to make an investment in myself before I expect anybody else to make an investment in me. And the more you can be that way and to be yourself and take initiative, you're going to find your influence is really going to keep growing. I do believe God stewards our influence. I believe there's something supernatural about our influence when we come at it with a servant's attitude and the right heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I just really want to respect you and honor you for wanting to invest in champion female ministers while also honoring your boundaries. I think that's really important. And as for female ministers, we also need to honor that and respect that. But knowing you, each of you individually, and how you champion women so well. I mean, Pastor Jim, you have female pastor on your staff, and Pastor Rod, you're hanging out with female pastors this weekend and learning and growing together. You're not just talking the talk, you're walking the talk. Now, this is my final question for you and for our audience. If there's any men out there, male ministers out there that's listening to our conversation today, as practicing male champions for female ministers in the Assemblies of God, what would you like to tell him so that he won't repeat the mistakes perhaps you made, or maybe just champion God's kingdom together with their sisters in Christ?
Go ahead, Jim.
Pastor Rod.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
Pastor
prefer Rod have the last word. I'm always taking notes from him. Well, do whatever it takes to get ladies on your team, your primary leadership team, even if that's only a volunteer team in a small church setting, on your board, and definitely if you're multi-staff size, do whatever you can. I think I've added 3 female pastors onto our staff the last 2 years at Central. I came back to pastor, there were no female actual church staff. We had one lady who was doing kind of paramissions work, but nobody on the actual, just church pastoral team with the portfolio there. And I just went, oh, I can't do this. I just need some ladies here. So, you know what? And I found God just started opening the doors for me. You start by making it a step of faith. And then give those ladies as much platform time as you possibly can, because they do need to be in front of people if respect for their leadership's growing. And then when you give them responsibility, also give them authority. This is the same with men. This is part of, leading. Of course, you don't give responsibility without authority. Sometimes we're a little more hesitant to give authority to women and make independent decision making. I mean, that sounds so demeaning even to hear myself say that, but that's the way some of us male lead pastors can be sometimes. And it's just very, very important that you make sure that you're giving platform time to ladies and you're giving responsibility with the commensurate authority and the right to make decisions without being micromanaged. And then watch them blossom. I just believe in what they can do. They'll sure help your ministry a lot.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you so much. That was so rich. Pastor Rod, what would you tell them?
Start young. We start looking for children who we think have an evident call of God on their life, and we start looking at 2nd or 3rd grade. And so if we are really going to raise up women in ministry, we've got to start young and speaking into their lives. And so I've been here enough years now that I've got a growing group who I've been investing in through their grade school, middle school, high school years, that we are in deep, close relationship. Our relationship is spiritual father in many ways to them, but for them, serving with me is natural because we have been doing life together for 10, 12, 15 years. So they know what I would do. They know what I would say. They know how I would think. So I think of one of my girls that's at Jim's church right now, Morgan Jumper. Well, every time she's not there, she's back and she's serving with me and working with me because we have this long-term history. You're probably not going to change the culture at your church overnight, but in a generation, you can bring a powerful change. And as you affirm young women whose God hand is on and you invest in their lives, other people will see them coming alongside you, walking with you, following you, learning from you. And that raises the value for everyone on the journey. And so we've got to look and say, I want to say to my girls, God can use you in any office that you're called to. You can be and do anything that I can be and do. And I see the hand of God on you, and I want to lean into that. I want to invest everything I can in you. I want you to succeed far beyond me. And it is my joy to be part of your journey. When you model it intentionally that way, it can change the culture of your church, and it will go far beyond me hiring somebody so I can say I have a woman on my team.
Wow, that's so powerful. You model it, you lead it by example, and you don't just give them the responsibility, but you couple that with authority. That is a very difficult task, but very important. Pastors, I feel like I can sit here and talk with you for hours and just learn from your wisdom so I can go in and teach, also model it. But I mean, for those people that are listening into our conversation, they will understand that you're not just doing this to be culturally relevant, but you're biblically sound. You're in your practice and the way you live your life and mentor and pastor. So I just want to sincerely thank you for your examples and your authenticity. I think this generation really needs that, and you embody that. So thank you so much for your time, your ministries, and just championing both men and women in God's kingdom. Thank you so much for our time together.
It was a privilege, Saehee. Thank you.
Thanks, Saehee.
Thank you, Pastor Rod. God bless you. That was such a powerful conversation. I cannot wait to come back and introduce more ministry experts so that we can learn together through their lives and stories. God bless you. We'll see you later.